You're listening to The Murder in My Family, brought to you by AbJack Entertainment. Be sure to check out some of the other great true crime podcasts from this network, including Missing Persons, Scene of the Crime, DNA ID, 3 Men and a Mystery, Malice, Zodiac Speaking, Riddle Me That, and All Things Crime. All of these podcasts are available for you to binge on right now, wherever you listen to podcasts. Subscribe where you're listening to this podcast so you don't miss an episode.
The views and opinions expressed by guests on this podcast do not necessarily represent those of the podcast, its host, or sponsors. If you would like to discuss the murder in your family on this podcast, please be sure to visit themurderinmyfamily.com for more information. You can support this podcast by visiting patreon.com/themurderinmyfamily. This episode may contain unsettling material or subject matter. Listener discretion is advised.
Thank you for joining me for episode 84 of The Murder in My Family. I'm your host, Mike Morford. In this episode, we'll be discussing the case of 18-year-old Brittany Phillips. On September 30th, 2004, Brittany stopped attending class and wasn't responding to calls. When a friend went to check on her, the door to her East Tulsa, Oklahoma apartment was unlocked. Police doing a welfare check found Brittany's body. She had been dead for at least 2 days. Investigators found and recovered DNA at the scene and began the 15-year chase of the suspect, which they eventually identified. In most cases, that would lead to an arrest. But sadly, that was not to be the outcome in this case. We'll dive into Brittany's story after some quick housekeeping. Independent podcasts like this one depend on word of mouth to bring in new listeners. So if you find that you enjoy this show, please take a minute to rate and review it wherever you listen to your podcast, and be sure to introduce a friend to the show and invite them to listen. With your help, The Murder in My Family can continue to grow and reach a new audience. To learn more about the show or the cases we discuss, please visit themurderinmyfamily.com. You can also find us on Twitter with the handle @MurderInMyFam, or by searching for The Murder in My Family podcast on Facebook. If you'd like to support this show through a Patreon donation, it's always appreciated, and you can do so by visiting patreon.com/themurderinmyfamily. Benefits of supporting the show on Patreon include early access to ad-free episodes of the show, plus bonus content not heard in regular episodes. Support may also include thank you cards, stickers, and more. If you prefer to, you can also support the show through a PayPal donation by visiting paypal.me/themurderinmyfamily. In each episode, I'll give shout-outs to any new supporters, and thank you to all of the supporters that generously donate to help keep the show growing and improving. One last note, please consider supporting any of the sponsors that you hear on The Murder in My Family, the way that those sponsors support the show. It's with our sponsors' support that the show can go on and continue to provide a platform to share these stories with you in every episode. Thank you, and now on with the show. Brittany Ivana Sarah Phillips was born on October 4th, 1985 in St. Petersburg, Florida. Brittany had one brother named Josh. Brittany was born with medical issues, but after a few months she was a healthy baby. Brittany was smart. She started kindergarten a year early. But growing up, Brittany wasn't cocky. She didn't feel that she was very smart and thought she was just good at studying. But she more than kept up with her older peers, and she received a full-ride chemistry scholarship to Eckerd College in St. Petersburg, Florida. Brittany was 5'2". Her mother called her Pretty Britty. In 2003, she left Oklahoma for college in Florida, but got homesick and came back to finish school in Oklahoma. Brittany and her mother Maggie spoke on the phone nearly every day. They were close, and Brittany shared a lot of the details of her life with her mom. At around 9:45 p.m. on September 27, 2004, Brittany dropped her friend off at her home and then headed to her own apartment to turn in for the night. Brittany had been feeling ill recently, and she had gone to the urgent care to be checked out, but she waited for hours and ended up leaving without being seen. She figured it was just seasonal allergies anyway, so she decided to wait and see a doctor in Chandler the next time she visited home. Maggie planned to make an appointment for Brittany at a doctor's office in their hometown. On September 28th, Brittany didn't show up to class. It was unlike her, but since she had been feeling ill recently, everyone just assumed she didn't feel well and stayed home. Maggie tried calling her, but didn't get an answer, and figured she'd get a call back soon. On September 29th, Brittany missed classes again. She hadn't called Maggie back and wasn't answering her phone. Maggie was trying not to worry. By September 30th, Brittany's friends were getting pretty nervous. At around 9 p.m., Maggie called Brittany and still got no answer, and she grew more and more frightened with each unanswered message. One of Brittany's friends decided to go check on her. Her father was a district attorney and former law enforcement officer, so she had him on the phone with her when she headed up the stairs to Brittany's second-floor apartment. When she got to the door of apartment 3216, the door was unlocked. Her father stopped her and told her not to go in, and he offered to call in a welfare check and have an officer come check on Brittany. Within an hour, police were at the scene entering the apartment, and they found Brittany dead in her bedroom. She was lying next to the bed, with her head near the foot of the bed. Investigators used the photo on her driver's license to positively identify her. She was still dressed in a sleeveless shirt and underwear. Authorities believe she may have been redressed in these items of clothing by someone else. An exam found that Brittany had been sexually assaulted. It was clear that she had fought back. The exam determined that Brittany had either been strangled or suffocated until she died. There was evidence that she had been pushed up against the wall, clear across the room from where she was found by police. Tulsa police investigating Brittany's murder had local authorities reach out to her mom in her hometown, and Maggie was shocked to learn that her daughter was dead, and taken aback by how the news was delivered, in a cold manner by local authorities. But in denial, she knew the police just had to be wrong, and she immediately headed out to Brittany's apartment. She drove 65 miles from Chandler to East Tulsa and arrived to find police at the apartment. It was then that reality started to set in for Maggie. Police found no sign of forced entry at Brittany's apartment, which was a one-bedroom on the second floor of the building, in the northwest corner of the complex. Authorities believe that the suspect left through the front door of the apartment, leaving it unlocked as he went. Police had two theories. One, that Brittany knew her killer and let them in, which would mean they came through the front door. But the more likely scenario in their estimation was that the killer entered through the French doors on the apartment's balcony, and that's where police focused. If their theory was correct, it meant that the killer would have had to scale the building to the second floor to get to her balcony. Eerily, all 8 of the apartments on the top floor of the building were accessible via a shared attic space. The door to this attic was hidden in the closet in Brittany's apartment. Investigators believe that someone could have laid in wait for Brittany to come home. They felt that the killer could have come into her apartment from any of the apartments in the building, widening the suspect pool to any neighbors or friends and family of those neighbors, and anyone who could have access to the building like maintenance workers. Multiple window screens in Brittany's apartment had been removed. Authorities believe this was someone's way of staging a robbery, but nothing seemed to be missing from the apartment. There was a semen stain on the bed sheets and a small bit of blood on a wall in the bedroom. It wasn't Brittany's blood, and the 2 samples came from the same man. There was a light purple pillowcase that didn't match any of Brittany's other bedding. Authorities believe the perpetrator may have, for some reason, brought the pillowcase with them to her apartment. They didn't tell the public this information early on, so as not to tip off the killer and allow them the opportunity to dispose of any matching linens. After 3 years, they decided to release this detail. By then, though, it could be so insignificant in someone's memory that it wouldn't lead to any tips, and in fact, that was the case. Brittany was buried on October 4, 2004, her 19th birthday. She has been described by family and friends as trusting and vulnerable. Sadly, some of her boyfriends were physically or verbally abusive toward her, but Brittany was nurturing and forgiving and drew that kind of person in. One of those people in her life was a security guard who Brittany felt was creepy and strange. She told him she didn't want to see him anymore, but he wouldn't leave her alone, and she had to block his calls. Police determined that this man was not the same person that left DNA in Brittany's apartment. In 2018, Parabon Nanolabs was able to create a snapshot of the person who had blood on the wall and ejaculated in Brittany's bed. He was most likely a white male with dark blonde to brown hair and blue or green eyes. He was likely of North European descent. Authorities were hopeful that this would jog someone's memory, since there was no matches to the DNA in CODIS. The sketch of the man didn't resemble anyone Brittany knew, but Maggie did think, based on the sketch, that her daughter would have been attracted to someone who looked like that. With DNA technology being utilized, and genetic genealogy being used more often, it seemed like this case would be solved soon. In the meantime, according to police, and as reported by local media, someone came forward with a tip saying that the Parabon sketch resembled someone that they knew, and they turned that person into police. But as we'll hear later in this episode, the way that actually unfolded is different from what was reported. Police investigated a man whose name supposedly was given to them by this tipster, and upon taking DNA from him, it matched the DNA in Brittany's apartment. This man admitted that he had been in Brittany's apartment. It seemed as if the case was about to break wide open, but Brittany's family, unfortunately, would soon be let down. Police determined that this man had been in Brittany's apartment, along with his girlfriend, who was a friend of Brittany's. They had stayed the night and had sex in her bed. That explained to police why his semen would be there. But the blood on the wall was less easily explainable. Police have never released the reason for his blood being there, if they had one, but they did tell Maggie that they had ruled him out. It's unclear whether police just accepted his explanation for how the DNA was there, or if they actually verified he was at work or had some other kind of alibi during the suspected time of the murder. Police had thought the DNA found in Brittany's bedding held the answer to her murder for over a decade. Now they had to rethink everything. Investigators created a profile of the person who killed Brittany. The profile states that he may be a night owl, or may be alone at night. He may struggle to deal with sexual problems. He may show high-risk behaviors that are dangerous to himself or others. He may have anger issues and struggle with issues of self-worth. He may have been arrested for rape or sexually motivated crime. He may have also been charged with endangering or public indecency. This person may have attempted to self-harm in the past or attempted to end his own life, and he may have succeeded since Brittany's murder. He may have driven along I-35, I-44, or I-40 for his job, and may have worked for public service, which would give him access to customer addresses. Despite the setback in the investigation, Brittany's mom has continued to advocate for her daughter's case. She has driven all over the country bringing attention to the case. Dr. Maggie Zingman now drives a pink and purple minivan called the Caravan to Catch a Killer. It has images of Brittany on the side as well as advertisements for her website, BrittanyPhillipsMurder.net. It's actually the third such caravan since Maggie's tireless effort means thousands upon thousands of miles on the car. She's traveled to 48 of 50 states in America. She has not only dedicated her time to solving her daughter's murder, but also to help pass legislation and supporting efforts to test backlog DNA kits. Maggie believes that there should be a law in the books in all 50 states requiring the collection of DNA upon arrest and conviction, as opposed to after someone serves time. Some cold cases are never closed because DNA isn't collected upon release, and dead inmates aren't released, so it's unclear whether their DNA is taken when they die. The good news is that over half of the states in the country now do have a law requiring DNA collection upon arrest, including Oklahoma. But the real problem lies in funding. Oklahoma was unable to implement the testing required of this law because there was no money for it. In addition to this, many police departments have backlogs of thousands of rape kits, and in some cases, like in Oklahoma, no requirement to test or keep the kits. When funding does come around for testing, priority is given to the cases that can still be prosecuted under the statute of limitations, which leaves many older cases like Brittany's to grow colder. If you have information about Brittany Phillips' murder, call the Tulsa Police Department at 888-596-9222 or call Crime Stoppers at 918-596-COPS. Dr. Maggie Zingman continues to search for answers in Brittany's case. She won't give up on justice for her daughter. She joined me to discuss the case, as well as the highs and lows of the investigation. That conversation is coming up in just a moment. Hey everyone, spring is here, and for many people, this is the time when we want to get out and get active. But for some of us, that's easier said than done, because often, things that have been weighing on us don't magically go away with the change of seasons. But the good news is, there is help, and that help is called BetterHelp. If there's something that's interfering with your happiness or preventing you from achieving your goals, then BetterHelp Online Counseling just might be the right solution for you. BetterHelp will assess your needs and match you with your own licensed professional therapist. You can connect in a safe and private online environment. It's so convenient, and you can start communicating with a counselor in under 24 hours. This isn't self-help, it's professional counseling. Send a message to your counselor at any time. You'll get timely and thoughtful responses. Plus, you can schedule weekly video or phone sessions, all without having to sit in an uncomfortable waiting room. BetterHelp can assist you with so many things, from trauma, depression, and anger issues, to LBGT matters, grief, stress, and so much more. Anything you share is confidential, and while BetterHelp isn't a crisis line, it is convenient, professional, and affordable. In fact, so many people have been using BetterHelp that they're recruiting additional counselors in all 50 states. I want you to start living a happier life today. As a listener of The Murder in My Family, you'll get 10% off your first month of BetterHelp by visiting BetterHelp.com/family. Join over 1 million people taking charge of their mental health. Once again, go to BetterHelp, that's HELP.com/family, and you'll save 10% on your first month of BetterHelp. Hi, Maggie, and thank you for coming on to discuss your daughter Brittany's case with us.
Thank you so much for asking me. I mean, it's always a gift when somebody wants to hear about our story.
Yeah, I know you've been going through extremes in an effort to let people know about Brittany's case, that it's still unsolved. I know you've done social media and podcasts and television. You started the website BrittanyPhillipsMurder.net. You've even driven a car around the country advertising your daughter's case, something I want to talk to you a little bit about later. But how much of a challenge has all of this been for you since Brittany's murder 16 years ago?
That's interesting because in some ways it's like I have no choice, so therefore there's no challenge. On the other side, every year that this has gone on, it becomes more and more of a challenge because, you know, I try not to have expectations, but you think maybe it's this year, or maybe we've been through all the bumps in the road, and it just seems, especially in the last 4 years, we've hit more and more challenges to the point where, I mean, I'll never quit, but, you know, I sometimes, you know, say, how much longer can I do this? Because it just, I'm basically the only one doing it. So, I mean, it is a challenge, but, you know, because of the people I meet along the way, that's what helps me reach the challenge. You know, I've just met so many people all across the U.S. and locally, and they're the ones that keep me going and saying no challenge is too much.
I imagine it's got to be really heavy on you because of, obviously, you're always going to be a champion for your daughter, but I assume that any parent that's in a position like you are that's just sort of reliving this all the time, it's got to weigh on you.
Yeah, it does. I mean, you know, I can't lie. There's every day that, you know, I feel that scream inside, why is this going on? Why did this happen? But on the other side, I learned early on that if I lost the energy to keep doing this, and I've really talked with many parents and found this to be true, it's that their memory dies if we don't keep on. And so that's, you know, the main thing is, you know, I want to keep her memory alive. I want to keep the story alive. But also, I think what's helped me in the probably half the time, so the last 7 or 8 years, is also trying to help share other families. So it's not just my story that I'm getting out there. And so that actually helps to energize me past my own pain, if that makes sense.
Sure, it's helping other people's, in a way, maybe beneficial to you?
Oh, definitely, definitely. Well, and hopefully, beneficial to them. But I just feel like then Britty's still doing something to help the world, because I think that was the type of young woman she was. She was going to make a difference in the world. And so somehow in her name, like changing Oklahoma's DNA law or connecting other families with media or to somebody to help them share their story. I mean, it helps her to live on in other people's memories too.
You just started to talk a little bit about Brittany and what she was like. Can you tell us a little bit about her so we can sort of get to know her a little bit?
Yeah, that's hard sometimes to put her all in a capsule, but she was extremely intelligent. Brittany was just a mixture of all these, what I believe are gifts. She was extremely intelligent. She went to college a year younger than most kids as freshmen. She was beautiful. I mean, I'm prejudiced, but I've been told by other people that she just had this unbelievable, surprisingly so, angelic quality. She had this perfectly round face and these beautiful blonde curls that just cascaded around her face and these deep, deep brown eyes. And she was a very passionate person. Of course, she wore her heart on her sleeve. She was always affected by other people's sadness or people being left out. Even in high school, I have a lot of friends who come up to me now and say, I wasn't part of a popular group. I wasn't part of a well-known group, but, Brittany would be sitting with me at lunch, or Brittany, because she was so intelligent, would help me with my chemistry or something like that. So, she, was just a truly empathetic, caring person. And when she went to college on a full-ride chemistry scholarship, she actually decided to major in cancer research. And so she was going to hopefully, she thought, maybe go into, research on medication or medicine or vaccines. If she was still alive, she'd probably be part of the research that's going on now. She was very mature in some ways, and then in some ways she was still like a little girl. I can remember, probably just a couple of months before she was killed, she was up at my house and she had just had some issues with a boyfriend or something, and she just laid her head in my lap. And I always, whenever she would get that way, whether she was 5 or then 18, she had this little pug nose, and I would take my finger down the side of her nose and tell her that it would be okay, and so she still needed that type of thing. But, she was very petite. She was 5'2", and she used to always get upset at me for giving her the jeans to make her short. But she did model off and on just because of her face, and she was just a very small, encapsulated, young woman. So,
as you mentioned, it sounded like she was very busy. She's going to college, had moved back and forth a little bit. That 2004 seemed like it was a really busy time frame for her. Is that correct?
Yes. Yeah, it was, because she had actually gone away to college in Florida for a year from 2003 to 2004. And then being a year younger than most, she decided she wanted to come back home to Oklahoma. So she came back, I think, in May and found an apartment, found work, enrolled in the junior college here in Tulsa, just get a few more classes before she could switch her credits up to the state school, OSU. And so, I was already living away because I had gotten a job that was like 2 hours from Tulsa. So I was only coming to Tulsa on the weekends. So we were finding an apartment, finding a car, sometimes even giving her rides to work. And so, it was very busy. And then she would come up maybe every weekend, every other weekend to my home in Chandler, which I just bought, which was maybe 50, 60 miles from her. Or I would come down and visit her. So, and, we searched for a long time for the apartment and went through background checks on it, police sites, and finally came up with this one that was right next to the high school she graduated from, because we thought, nothing's listed about this. She went to that high school 4 years. We never heard anything bad about it. So, we thought it was a great choice. So I guess she moved in there in July. And again, it was right next to her old high school. So we thought it'd be a perfect place. So it was very busy.
And it seems like you kept in regular contact, even if not seeing her frequently as much as you might want to because of the distance. It sounds like you talked maybe on the phone pretty frequently.
Oh, yeah, at least 2 or 3 times a week, and often near the middle or the end of the week, because that would be when we would make plans, either her coming up to Sam or me going down to Tulsa. And plus, I'm a psychologist, and I was working at the female prison then, and I was on call, so sometimes I couldn't, go down there. So I was always, talking to her, seeing how school, when she was away in college, even her friends, her roommates used to comment to her and sometimes to me about, she tended to talk to me like a friend. She would talk to me about anything, boyfriends, issues, self-esteem, anything. And, so she was always calling and talking to me about things.
Well, let's talk about your last call on September 27th. That was the last time you talked to her. Was that a normal conversation? Was there anything out of the ordinary, anything that left you worried or maybe later on looking back bothered you?
That conversation was, as far as I can remember, not that odd. It was Brittany getting upset about something not working out. And what was not working out is she always had these nasal allergies. And so she finally, after school, went with this friend of hers to an urgent care. And she had been sitting there for like 2 hours, she said, and she couldn't get in. And she was just all upset and angry. And so I did my best to calm her down. She didn't mention anything else. She mentioned she had seen her brother at the cafeteria. Right. When she called me, I didn't think it was that odd because it was Brittany getting upset about something, which she did off and on. And she and a friend after school, she'd been at the downtown junior college campus. They went and stopped at urgent care because she always had these allergies in her little nose, just was allergic to everything. And so she was very upset. She'd been there 2 hours, couldn't get in, and so I was trying to calm her down, which was part of my job with her sometimes. And then I told her, well, let's get together over the weekend. Over the week, I will try to get you a doctor's appointment with my doctor, and then, we'll solve this. We'll get something done. And so she said, okay, I'm going to drop my friend off at her apartment, and then I'm going to go home and go to bed. And so really, other than her being upset, nothing was out of the ordinary in that call. And so afterwards, it was too late that night because that was like at between 8 and 9, or probably it was more like 7:30 to 8 p.m. And so I knew I couldn't call anybody. So the next day I started calling doctors, and I tried to call her at, I think, that Tuesday night and that Wednesday night, and I couldn't get her, but I left messages, but I knew she was at school late, so I didn't think anything about it. And then I tried to get her that Thursday night, and I didn't get an answer, so I left what I call the typical mom message of, Brittany, I know you're okay, but this is your mother. You need to call me back. If nothing else, just say, I'm fine. And that was Thursday night, which was September 30th. And then at 1 a.m., October 1st, which was the very next morning, is when I got the knock on the door. And I had been expecting a friend coming in from Chicago who was caught by a rainstorm, and so he was running late. And so I thought it was him. And when I opened the door, it was a young sheriff who had a piece of paper in his hand. And it was like out of a movie because it was thundering, it was lightning, it was raining, and the rain was coming in my door. And he sticks out his hand and hands me this piece of paper. He goes, are you Maggie Dingman? I said, yeah. He goes, you need to call Tulsa police. Your daughter's been murdered.
That's something, obviously, a sheriff's officer or police officer showing up at early hours of the morning or whatever is not a good sign.
No.
Did you feel right away that something was wrong, and did your mind immediately think of Brittany?
Well, it was odd. I mean, because just the way he did it put me in shock. I mean, he said your daughter's been murdered. Actually, what he said was, he handed me the piece of paper. He goes, "You need to call Tulsa police. Your daughter's been murdered." And it was so short and quick. And, yes, I don't even think a police at the door initially gave me, because I just wasn't thinking anything would happen to Brittany or my son Josh. So, but his words and how quickly he said that, and then he pretty much backed away after that. I was in total confusion, and then I started doing maybe he's confused. He didn't give me much information. Maybe he's wrong. Maybe it's the wrong person, because even then I thought, well, how could they be telling me my daughter died? Because it's only this young sheriff. It's not a chaplain or anything, in the movies, or you hear from other people, they tell you, there's always ways that they notify people, but that's not the way I was notified.
Well, and when you reached out to the police that he asked you to contact, what did they tell you? What did they let you know?
Well, first I just, I didn't know what to do. I didn't know whether to call him or call a friend or what. And I had a 2-story house, and it's the old house, and I just fell back against the stairs, and I kept looking at the number, and finally I called the number, and it was to Jeff Felton, who was my detective for, almost 10 years. And he, said, "I can't tell you a lot, but I need you to come down to Tulsa now. And it looks like your daughter's been murdered." And, he asked me, can I drive there alone, and all those things. But he couldn't tell me a lot over the phone. But something in his words was a lot more calming than the way the sheriff did it. But then after I hung up from him, I was like, who can I call? I don't think I can drive that, almost 2 hours myself, or hour myself. Should I call my parents? And then I keep going, well, but I don't want to wake up anybody. We think these crazy things, when we get information like that, because, obviously my parents didn't mind being woken up. They hated the news, but, they and my sister and brother had flights into Tulsa within hours, and then I called my best friend who watched my daughter and son grow up pretty much from 1991, and she and her husband came up, and I barely remember that time, just because, I was just so confused. You can't accept it, you're going, maybe it's something else, but it wasn't. So, I was there alone, I think, for maybe an hour, because it took my friend and her husband an hour to drive up, to then drive back with me to Tulsa.
It had to be a very tough ride going there, knowing what you were going to face.
Yeah, well, it was interesting because my friend and I drove in my car, and she was driving because I didn't feel like I could drive, and her husband was following us. And then we were about 25 minutes out of Tulsa, and I said, I have to do this alone. And I guess part of my thought process then was, I'm so devastated, but I don't want to subject my friend and her husband to what I may see, And so I guess just that little part of the protective me just thought, I can't put you all through this. And so we called her husband, and then she got back into his car, and I drove the rest of the way myself. I just didn't know how I was going to handle it, and I just didn't, I didn't want them to have whatever I was going to see in their memories for the rest of their life. So
yeah, and it's understanding wanting to protect someone else from what you were experiencing. When you got there and they started talking to you and telling you what happened, I assume that shock eventually wears off, and now you've got to take in this information. Did your head turn to spinning thoughts about who might have done this? Was there someone you didn't like, or someone that stood out that you need to check this person out. Did anything like that come to mind for you?
Well, interestingly enough, I didn't get a chance to immediately do that because when I got there, I walked in, the door was open, and I assumed that the detective was going to be, inside. And I came in there, and the two cats that my daughter was holding for me because I had been moving came running out to me. And all of a sudden, this police officer walks out, and he goes, "Who are you?" And I said, "I'm Brittany's mother." And he said, "She's not here." And I went, "What?" He said, "They identified her by her license, so she's not here." So, and he didn't say you can go to the medical examiner. He just said you need to wait here for Jeff Felton. I'm just guarding the crime scene, nothing else. And so I get there. I expect to find my daughter. I expect to have to identify her. And, I'd already been shocked by the way that sheriff informed me. And then I come down there and expecting, trying to gear myself up because I'm going to have to see my daughter's dead body. And she wasn't there. And they identified her by her license. I was like, of course, I'm thinking this is not CSI, that's for sure. So I had to wait for about a couple of hours for Jeff. I think he came probably around 5 a.m. and stuff. And so, I was still confused, but yeah, immediately it went to some of her boyfriends who had been violent, but luckily she got out before they were too violent with her. And, I had, thought about some even earlier boyfriends way back in 8th or 9th grade. So, of course, those people came to mind. And, of course, I made sure when I talked to Jeff, those names, were given because it was in the early days of the investigation. So, yeah, of course, I think almost any parent goes back to those problem relationships, although I didn't think any of them, when she was dating them, had the potential to kill her. But I'm also a trauma psychologist, so I also know that people with abusive history can end up killing people. So people who have histories of being abusive.
Yeah, and then sometimes people that have never done anything violent before were violent might not ever do anything violent again, and in a fit of rage in a certain moment can do something that is out of character.
Yeah, and the double-edged sword of my background is, I was just turning 55 then, but I'd been a trauma psychologist. I had been a trauma survivor. So, I understood a lot of these things, but also the thing that over the years sort of where the idea of it being an accident sort of waned for me was because somebody who does it accidentally, often the guilt gets to them. Often the guilt will, get them to tell somebody. Whereas a serial sexual homicide that I've learned over the last 15 years, it's one of the few crimes that very few people talk about, even in prison. And especially Brittany, even though we buried her on her 19th birthday, she looked like she was about 15. And so you get this whole thing about somebody's not going to talk about it in prison because sexual predators of children do get hurt. So, yeah, there was everything. Over all these years, everything becomes a possibility. Accidental. Could he already be dead? The thing that kept popping up over the years because we had such, we thought, good DNA was that, he could be serial because we started ruling out 800,000, probably over 2,000 suspects just regionally that didn't match the DNA profile we had. So, the detective and others began to say, maybe there's the possibility he is serial, which is sort of what got me traveling and telling the story at year 2 or 3, because nobody seemed nationally to be interested in our story. So I decided to get it out to every city I could, because you never know. You never know. A detective or their spouse might hear the story and go, God, that's just like the, 2004 case or 2010 case or whatever.
Yeah. I mean, you bring up a very good point that a lot of times this kind of crime happens to someone close to the victim, but every once in a while there's that incident that's part of like a serial predator that moves from area to area, and sometimes that's the case. So, going nationwide and trying to get the story out there definitely seems to be something worth doing. Based on the clues at the scene, I don't know how much the police discussed with you, but did they give you any feelings or any opinions about anything at the scene or what might have happened or any theories that they had?
Yeah, and of course that's changed over the years. But, initially, Jeff, for 10 years, let me into the case 10 times more than I've heard of very many detectives doing, because he was asking me questions like, was Brittany, where did you normally wear a T-shirt and underwear to bed, those type of things. The screens were off all of the windows in her bedroom, and I think even the living room. But some of those screens were to windows that were 2 stories up. So, at one point he said he felt like maybe the person staged it to look like it was a break-in, but it wasn't. There was French doors on the edge of her bedroom that went out to a little porch that she and I used to sit on. And he had learned through some investigation that one time, and she told me this too, that one time she locked herself out of the apartment and a young man was able to hike himself up because he was so tall onto the balcony and sort of break in through those lattices of that door because it wasn't very strong and stuff. And so, of course, they investigated him. He said at one point he thought, that the person it looked like they tried to clean her up. She was laying on the floor in the opposite direction of where she would have been laying on the bed. So her head was near the wall if she was sleeping on the bed, but on the floor it was at the same end of the bed. So, there was a time where they were looking at a lot of young burglars who could have been strong enough to, battle her. There was some apparent defensive fighting because there were some marks on the wall. I mean, it's hard now because so much of this has changed in the last 2 years, because all of this was based also, as the years evolved, on the DNA. The prime profile that we used was from blood and semen from the same person. So, like any detective would think, and I don't fault him, they thought that has to be the killer. Why else? Because the semen was found on the bed on a sheet and the blood was found on a wall. And so we thought that has to be the killer. So, I mean, I think what was really good about Jeff was he didn't put any theory away. He kept looking at all the theories. Somebody close, like you said, that somebody within a 5-mile radius, somebody who knew her and stuff, to serial, to, every time sexual crimes had a crime, they would run them through. And so.
It sounds like he was pretty open to different things, different possibilities.
Yeah, he was. He was very good. Now I still communicate with him, and he now beats himself up for focusing on that DNA. I mean, although he focused on other things, but he just says, I wish I hadn't put as much on that, which I don't fault him.
And we'll talk a little bit more about that DNA. I definitely want to ask you about that. But one thing I wanted to ask you too is sometimes a young woman, a college-age student, is going to share things and information with her closest girlfriends, her confidants, her friends. Was there any indication that Brittany told any of her friends or people in her inner circle about problems she was having, people she was afraid of, anything that she might not have told you?
I think a few things came out, but like I said, Brittany shared everything with me. There was a young man who was a security guard out at the mall, and he came up under the radar, or he came onto the radar after the murder because he was talking to people at different stores in the mall as if he was part of the investigation, which, red flag, being involved in the crime. And I learned, I don't remember if Brittany told me, I think she did, but I learned later that he had been calling her and she blocked him on the phone. And so, in Jeff's typical way, the detective, he said, God, Maggie, this DNA has got to match. And then it didn't, there were some old boyfriends that, of course, the friends immediately, spoke up about the same people I said, that maybe supposedly one of the people that I thought was a suspect, she had just recently tried to start talking with him again and had some good issues. But again, they looked at him and it wasn't him, at least per that DNA. So there weren't a lot, but the old boyfriends, the security guard, but a lot of people, I knew most everything. So at least from what Jeff shared with me and stuff. I've learned some other things 2 years later, like she had gone down to Galveston or somewhere, I think farther south in Texas, to visit a friend about beginning of August. And I thought it was just so she and her college friend could just, have a break before the fall semester started. And about 3 years later, that friend called me and said that Brittany had come down there because that friend in Texas had been assaulted and raped, and they were going down there to provide support. So, and she began to wonder, and finally, a couple of years into the murder, she began to say, maybe he followed her back. So that was given to the police. She was in Florida a year, so they have actually looked at some people down that she had interaction with down in Florida.
It seems like they didn't leave any stones unturned. It seemed like they really tried to explore all possible avenues.
They did. Yeah. Did is the important word.
Yeah. And so time goes by. The case isn't solved. Let's go back to this evidence that we know they found. They found at the scene semen and blood, 2 separate samples, but they conclusively belong to the same person. Is that correct?
Correct. They also had other unidentified files. Somebody told me they had like 60 unidentified files of DNA, which, partially is from friends being over there. But the main one that they used and they put up into CODIS, where it probably in the years it was up there over 1 million times, I'm told by the Bureau here, that was from, like I said, semen on the sheet and then blood, a small mark on the wall in her apartment.
So they're able to make a Parabon snapshot of what this person that left that DNA
right, 2019.
Like. 2019. Right. Now it's gone this long. They finally make this snapshot of the person, what they might look like based on their DNA makeup and who left that blood and that semen. Now there's an image, people can find this online, but I had to imagine that you and everyone in Brittany's circle are probably looking at this picture going, all right, this has to be someone, who could this be? Eventually, police identify and connect someone to that snapshot photo. And publicly, they say that it was the result of a tipster. But that's not the full story or not the correct story.
I got a call from my detective, and he said we had a direct hit from the DNA. And so I'm going, oh my God, I'm going to have to go to court. Oh, how am I going to handle this? I'm just doing all this spinning. And he goes, and it's not our killer.
According to police, they talked to this young man and he had an alibi in that he had consensual sex with one of Brittany's friends in her bed.
And when he said that, I knew exactly it was one of two people, either the young woman that she gave rides to the girl whose dad had been a DA, or it was her best friend whose dad had been a Tulsa cop, who actually was called on the murder scene, but then got called elsewhere. And he had watched Brittany grow up for 10, 11 years. And if he had been called to that murder scene, so I'm going crazy. I'm going, what do you mean? What do you mean? And he just said, well, I'll explain it, when you get back here. I talked to the young man. I talked to the young man's ex-girlfriend, and I talked to her father. It wasn't a killer, but I still didn't understand. But I was taking must have been a very good interrogation. I don't understand, but airtight alibi, And so I get back to Tulsa. And Eddie said, well, I'll send you the press release of what we're going to tell everybody, and then it'll explain it. Well, the press release just said exactly what you said, that a sketch had been developed from Parabon, and through somebody's tips, a suspect was found and then ruled out, as opposed to saying the DNA profile, the primary DNA profile that had been developed from two sources of, and maybe you couldn't say all of that in saying it, but, what they could have said and they didn't was that the DNA, like they say in all these stories now, the DNA was, did a genetic history, and there was a direct hit, and that led us to a suspect who, after interrogation, was not the killer. But that's not what they said. So half of the media was going, so it's just another suspect, it's just another tip. As opposed to me going to my Channel 6 station with Laurie Fulbright, who's been my warrior for the last 16 years. And we broke the story and got a lot of people mad at me. But, it was not being told right because it just seemed like one more suspect was ruled out, as opposed to the DNA used, the main profile used for 15 years leads to somebody not the killer. And jumping around here, long story short, it ends up being her boyfriend, my daughter's best friend's boyfriend. And through Eddie's interrogation, I was told that, well, he was there so often all the time that he could have dropped blood there anyways. And this part I knew to be true, is that Brittany was such a sweet young girl that she let her 17-year-old best friend sleep with her boyfriend at her house, that's Brittany, not what I would propose, but, and so he said, because of that was the airtight alibi, nothing else. That was the airtight alibi. So people have questioned that. I mean, long story short, when this thing happened with the DNA, I thought I was being a bad driver because I had like 2 or 3 police cars run their lights behind me. And all of a sudden, because I'm always driving around in my car, which is crap, and all the time they were stopping me to tell me how devastated they were that this DNA was not the killer and that they had run DNA for Jeff and everything, And so, it doesn't make sense on the record that why Chief Jordan, who was the prior police chief, has always been willing to talk with me, and I just want to communicate. I have no issues with Chief Franklin, but yet he doesn't seem to want to talk about the case. just on a face-to-face value, or even have Vic, who offered to come in and sit with me in it, And I'm concerned that, although I don't think this, I'm concerned that somehow they're being hesitant on this case because of the DNA, or because of, it wasn't a mistake, but forensically in the past, health has had problems. So I don't know if they're concerned that this is a forensic issue, and that, it's going to hurt them. It doesn't make sense. It's very bizarre. Little did I think she would be murdered. Little did I think that it would still be a cold case at 14 or 15 years. Little did I think that after all of this, we get a direct hit. And then little did I think that after we get a direct hit, it's not a killer. I keep running these odds of getting these chances, like having DNA, but not having it match, having it analyzed in a direct hit. But so it's just, everything means these good chances, and then they drop from my hand, so.
Yeah, it's good. That's going to be very frustrating. And just to go back for a second to this young man who did match the DNA. So he admits to being intimate with his girlfriend in Brittany's house. Therefore, he has a reason for his semen to be there. Has he ever explained the blood?
Well, no, per my detective, no. But my detective said, well, because he was there all the time, he could have had a bloody nose. He could have had something.
So it raises enough doubt. It sounds like that it would be hard to prosecute him because he has an explanation for it being there.
Possibly. One, I've had people anonymously tell me who are involved with TPD and other groups that they know the interrogation had some flaws in it. Two, I have learned recently from the direct source of his girlfriend that he was only there a few times. So, and I'm going to be telling Eddie that today. So,
I don't know if you know the answer to this, but I'm going to ask anyway. So just to verify his story, and we know he's now has an explanation for his blood and his semen being there, but was the step taken to see where he was during the estimated time of the murder to make sure that he was accounted for during that time and had an alibi for his whereabouts?
I would assume so. I don't know that. And when I asked about the airtight alibi, which is pretty hard 15 years later, I think I remember being told the alibi was that he was there all the time.
Yeah, to me, and I'm not an expert, I'm not a professional investigator, but I can accept his excuse for why blood and semen would be found there, but I would want to do my due diligence and also have someone give him an alibi to say he was at work, or he was at home, or he was out seeing a movie or something, that during the estimated time of the murder that he is accounted for somewhere. So he might be able to explain away why that's there, but I would want something else to back that up and verify that. And hopefully they have done that, and that was done in addition to just saying he was there all the time. I hope they went the extra step and tried to verify that.
And that's the thing is, I'm not faulting anything with them right now, but all across the country, because I talk to police departments, every city I go to, they all invite cold case investigative units, from outside, a fresh set of eyes, to look at cases. And why that's not being allowed with this, I don't understand. And I've had people I know call and offer their services, and so, again, through no mistake of their own, possibly if we had somebody else looking at the case, they would see that.
So it seems like maybe I don't want to say back to square one. Hopefully you're not back that far, but is the case set back now because they don't feel that they can make a case against this guy because he has a reason for being there? Or are they going to try and do anything as far as with any of the other DNA profiles that they potentially have? Where does the case go from here?
Well, that's where, in me talking, because I do a lot of this initiating of these extraneous assessments or whatever you want to call. In me talking with Jensen and Holt, that's where they offered the funding, and I connected them to Eddie. They were going to fund it to send it off to Parabon. For some reason, that stopped, and now they're sending it to, and I can't think of the other group. But for some reason, Eddie decided that he wants it sent somewhere else, and he keeps telling me, well, he's getting the paperwork done, and he's waiting to hear back from them, and then he's going to send it up to Steve. And so every time I talk to him, it's pretty much the same. But supposedly, all the random DNA or whatever, the other profiles are going to be analyzed, and stuff. But Eddie also is the cold case detective for all Tulsa cold cases, which there's hundreds and hundreds of them. And so, I don't even see how he can deal with all that. But, it is back to square one, except that we have all these suspects that Jeff used to say to me, this just fits the profile, that really we should be looking at, and just to say no, since they didn't match any of the other DNA either, we don't know that. We're just going on the assumption it's up in CODIS. And also, I thought the DNA swabbed every single old male friend, boyfriend, etc. I've learned in those early years it was so expensive, they only swabbed, the really suspecty suspects. So, I don't see any harm in letting a cold case group come in and look at the case. And I would think most detectives would welcome that.
Yeah, it just sometimes pride maybe gets in the way, and they don't want to make it look like they've got to rely on someone else to help them solve a case. I always wonder if that's something like that.
I don't know, because it's all across the news about, cold case groups working together. Tulsa has a great cold case group that is made up of retired PPD, sheriffs, etc., but it's for Tulsa County cases, and that's why they can't take my case on, because it's a Tulsa proper case.
Yeah.
Which, to me, I wish, I think we do much better if we sometimes cross jurisdictions.
Sure. And people work together, sometimes the results will be better. It sounds like you're not giving up hope. I know you're staying out there in the spotlight. You're trying to keep attention on Brittany's case. And the one thing we talked a little bit about was the caravan to catch a killer. Can you tell us a little bit about that project?
Yeah. I've had 3 cars that a company here, Midwest Wraps, has donated wraps to my car. And starting in about 2008, really 2007, we started ruling out a lot of people with our DNA profile. And so when it got to like 800, 900 suspects being ruled out, my detective said, well, maybe he's moved on. And I thought, well, how do I get my story nationwide? And I started seeing trucks with wraps on them, which is basically a computer printed picture that's wrapped with adhesive on the car. And I saw this truck wrapped, and I left a note on it, and ended up being this young man who owned Midwest Wraps. And I gave him pictures of Brittany and said her favorite colors were pink and purple, and they and Feller's Vinyl, which had a wrapping school down here, donated the material and came up with my first wrap on a RAV4. And I had no idea. I had never read of anybody doing this, but I just decided I'm going to start covering the country, and I'd email news stations in the city I was coming to a day before. I'd stay there for a day or two and hopefully get stories. and just started sharing her story. And then slowly but surely, after going on about 4 or 5 tours, I realized it's not just Brittany's story. It's about how DNA can solve, crimes. And back then we didn't have the DNA at arrest in Oklahoma. So I was working on it here and talking about it across country. And now, like I said, my last tour was out west. The 20th tour I've covered over almost 300,000 miles, about 280,000 miles through 48 states on 21 tours. And I've had over probably 330 reporters do our story in all these states. And, it's really half Brittany's story and half connecting with other homicide families and educating people about DNA. And, and it used to be about applauding, how well I've worked with police because I was always hearing horror stories. But now I also, empathize with the frustration of others and stuff. But it's what's kept me going. And, cold cases among COVID has been very hard because I have not been able to get the story out there. And when I go out there, it recharges me. I mean, I get hugs and prayers and communication from just people from every walk of life. And it's always been made me able to come back. And then I'm a psychologist and I work with combat veterans. So it recharges me to come back and do that work. And, I haven't traveled over a year. So I'm hoping in July, I was supposed to go to Wilmington, North Carolina to present at a conference last April, and it was canceled. So now I'm hoping to head east and then south down into Florida to do a tour down there. And of course, I've covered most areas now 2 or 3 times.
Wow. That's and the vehicle, just for people that they can Google it, Caravan to Catch a Killer. It's a really unique, eye-catching vehicle that you definitely draw some attention, which is obviously your intent.
Yeah.
Well,
the odd thing is, though, every time I get a story, the local reporters go, "Oh, of course, this has been all over national news, hasn't it?" It hasn't. It has not ever been, and I've never heard of another mother of a murdered daughter doing this on their own son. And I had contact from Good Morning America 3 times when I was on the road. For some reason, the story dropped. America's Most Wanted told me DNA was not enough of a story. 48 Hours, Dr. Oz, all of them have contacted me. But the stories drop before we've even talked. So it's not that I've talked to them and they don't like me. It's like just all of a sudden the contact stop. And I know, it's the hook and stuff, but in talking, Arian DeRoche, who connected us, contacted me about 5 or 6 years ago because she was writing for ID Discovery and wanted to do our story. And then the production team kept saying to her, "There's not enough of a hook. There's not enough of a hook," because I guess Brittany has a boring murder or something. But just the twists and turns now. And so now, she does her own stuff. But, she has, like Cece Moore, she has just been there for me for years. She's offered, because she was an investigator at one point, she's offered her services to Eddie and stuff. But, it's people like that. When you ask what keeps me going, it's people like you who do our story. It's people like Marion. It's people like Cece Moore, and then all the unnamed people. But these people who are very well known and good at what they do, the fact that they take time to still help me fight my story and my, mission, it's just unbelievable.
Yeah. And I think your story should be national because we hear in the news about all these cases being solved with DNA, genetic genealogy, and it seems like every week there's a new case being solved. And Brittany's case is the first one that's sort of unique to where they're able to identify the person that left the sample, but they can't make an arrest. Again, that being to
I know.
so it is unique, and I think it should be national because we're just so used to everyone being identified and the chips falling easily.
Yeah, and it just aches my heart. I mean, I'm so happy for the families, but I'm going, oh God, Well, and that would be interesting. So one little thing too, they wouldn't let Cece Moore talk to the news about it here, but I think somebody should talk to Cece Moore just in general about cases like that because they really don't happen that much. And she's been in many of these cases that they've done wreck hits and they are solved. But I agree with you. That's very true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so we talked a little about what you're doing as far as the caravan. Can you share again any of your websites or your social media where people can follow your journey and learn more about Brittany's case?
Right. And I have to apologize because my website, I haven't been on it recently. But the website is BrittanyPhillipsMurder.net, like you already said. And then what is more up to date right now is our Facebook page, which is under Brittany Phillips, but it actually, you can find it better with going facebook.com, mom.missing.Brittany, and her full name, the Brittany, because I'm constantly posting, especially when I'm on the road, of what I'm doing. And then, because I have done many of her tips over the years, I my email is out there too. I want people to, people are more than welcome to email me with any ideas too. And of course, that picture is no longer valid, because that was the DNA and supposedly he looks like this guy too. I don't know. But that picture, they didn't really explain that the picture is really no longer valid.
Yeah, so it's almost like it's useless if they think that they can't make a case against him. The picture doesn't help. I know you've heard from and been in touch with people who are in similar situations as you with the loss of a loved one, maybe a parent that's lost a child, and they're struggling to get answers. What advice do you have for them?
Well, I often present at a lot of places, conferences, OSBI. We have a homicide survivor group. And I say, there's just a couple of things. One, that no emotion is wrong. You're going to be angry. You're going to be jealous like I am when somebody else's case gets solved. But you have to allow yourself every emotion and stuff. And also that, I learned early on that if I walked away from the pain, it was never going to get better. I was never going to learn how to carry it. So the more you walk towards and through the pain, i.e., looking at her face on my car every day, it's not that it totally goes away, but you get to have the good memories in between the pain, because if you're trying to push down every memory so you don't feel pain, then you don't have the good memories, and that, people are uncomfortable with murder and unresolved loss or, unexplained loss and stuff. And so people are going to say things to you just out of their own uncomfortableness, so it's hard sometimes to not want to go, but you don't understand. But on the other side of it, there's no wrong way to feel, you just, and there's no set time in healing. I cry almost every other day, but I also laugh and I also can talk about her story, and, it also helps if you talk and organize groups even of other homicide survivors, because you have power in the group. Many of us have said this, and it's a family that you would never, ever wish to join. But once you're part of it, it's the most unbelievable family, because we've lost, somebody to something that was not planned for, but the compassion between all the people who have been through it can really help you through.
Yeah, almost as if they have an understanding that the typical person, they might feel for you because you've lost someone, but they're not in your shoes, whereas these other people have gone through that experience. Right. Sure.
The only thing I'd say from that too is that, sometimes in seeking help, being a trauma psychologist, I have some people say to me, but how can somebody help me if they've never been through it? And, when I was very young and had PTSD, it was somebody who had never been trauma who actually helped me and got me to want to go into the field and who I've modeled my style after. So, seek help and, see how the person is. Don't only seek, somebody who has been through it for the professional help, because you may miss out on somebody who really can just help you walk through it.
Sure.
But definitely reaching out to other homicide families is just such a gift.
Yeah, that's good advice. And I just have one final question for you. If the person that took your daughter is out there listening to this, what would you want them to hear? What would you want to say to them?
I don't believe that anybody who would murder somebody and be silent about it for almost 15 years now would have the ability to hear my words. So, I say what I say to people when they say, "Aren't you scared?" if he's still out there. And I said, I won't stop, and I'm not scared. And I can't bring Brady back, but if you're still alive, and I can get one more murder off the streets, I will do it. But, my guess is this person has no empathy, has no compassion, my words won't make a difference.
Yeah. And hopefully the words that do make a difference that you have to say are for the people maybe that are in your shoes or have gone through the experience, whereas this person probably doesn't care, but your words can still help other people.
And, that's the other thing. I just, if anybody hearing this story, please feel free to reach out to me. I really want to hear your story, and we do post other people's stories and stuff like that. So
I can't thank you enough for coming on and sharing Brittany's story with us and helping us get to know her a little bit and sharing about the case. I do hope that you somehow get the answers and the justice you've been waiting for a long time.
Well, you will always have a place in my heart for doing this, and I will keep on till I get the answers, or I will keep on till I'm not here anymore. So I appreciate it. This is truly a gift for me.
Well, again, I'm happy to do my part and spread the word and get your story out there so that people know this is a case that needs help and is still unsolved. Thank you once again for joining me for this episode of The Murder of My Family. I'd like to thank Sonny Landon for writing and research assistance in this episode. We'll be back here soon with an all-new episode of The Murder of My Family, and I hope you'll join me for it. But before you go, remember that every murder victim means something to somebody.